When we compare that with Genesis 5:5, which says Adam lived to be 930 years old. He's actually one of the oldest men in the Bible. The apologist Carl Johnson confronts this problem when he says in his work, quote, "In the first verse, we are told that Adam would die the very day he ate the forbidden fruit. Yet the second states that he lived to be 930 years old. Surely there's a contradiction here," someone says, namely me. Not when you understand the meaning of death in the Bible. Adam did die spiritually the day he disobeyed God, unquote. Johnson is employing a blatant deception. Nothing is said about a spiritual death. Where does the text state or say that he would die spiritually? It says he would die that day, period. Are we going to allegorize, symbolize, and interpret figuratively every verse that puts the Bible supporters in a bind? Another example of fundamentalists interpreting verses in a figurative rather than a literal sense in order to escape is found when we compare Proverbs 3:13, which says, "Happy is the man who finds wisdom and the man who gets understanding." When we compare that with Ecclesiastes 1:18, which says, "For much wisdom is much grief, and he that increases knowledge increases sorrow," unquote. The former says that wisdom brings happiness, while the latter says greater wisdom only increases your sorrow. So does wisdom bring happiness or does it bring grief? You'll never know from the Bible. On page 176, in the famous apologetic writing written over 100 years ago entitled Alleged Discrepancies of the Bible, apologist John Halley provides the following explanation for this conflict. He states, "In the first text, wisdom denotes spiritual wisdom, which prepares for and lays hold upon the future life. In the second case, the term implies mere worldly wisdom, knowledge, wisdom limited to this sphere of this life," unquote. Pure rationalization is the only appropriate description of this defense, because there's no reason whatever for making a distinction of this kind. Not only does the text not draw such a difference, but it isn't even implied. One could just as easily reverse the situation and say with equal justification that the former is earthly and the latter is spiritual. After all, two can play that game. As they say, what's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. In several instances, we have two or more contradictions in one verse. For instance, 2 Samuel 10:18 says 700 men and 40,000 horsemen, while the same account in 1 Chronicles 19:18 says 7,000, not 700 men that David slew, and 40,000 footmen, not horsemen. In other words, cavalry versus infantry. And finally, in some instances, contradictions are in blocks or groups of anywhere from 10 to 25. One of the most prominent examples can be seen by comparing Ezra 2 with Nehemiah 7. In each instance, we have a listing of the sub-clans that returned from the captivity and the number of people in each. Approximately 35 sub-clans are listed, yet over half the numbers disagree. In addition, someone doesn't know how to add very well because the totals are in error. Ezra 2:64 says the total is 42,360, when actually the total is 29,818. Nehemiah 7:66 also says that the total was 42,360, when its total is actually 31,089. Ezra erred by 12,542, and Nehemiah erred by 11,271. In our next program, we'll continue listing many of the simple but basic contradictions that are to be found in Scripture. That completes our presentation, and please join us later for the second edition of Biblical Errancy Commentary, when we'll continue showing why the Bible is nothing more than the flawed composition of some fallible human beings. Thank you for listening.